babe, wanna leave this town. I'm saying, lover, if you wanna go, I'm down. 'Cause I will make the biggest thing.
Hey there, fellow travelers.
And welcome to She's Got Baggage, where we dive into all the moments of travel, the good, the bad, the weird, the confusing, and every fascinating nuance along the way. I'm Abby.
And I'm Katy.
And together, we're your travel gal pals, here to share the full spectrum of our experiences from life beyond borders.
So grab a seat and get ready to join us as we explore the diverse tapestry of travel, from exhilarating highs to the challenging lows and everything in between.
This is your final boarding call. Thanks for joining us on today's adventure.
Hello and welcome back to She's Got Baggage. I'm Katy.
And I'm Abby. Thanks for tuning in again to unpack with us. If you've ever considered teaching English as a way to make money while you see the world, stay with us today while we talk about our experiences doing exactly that.
Last time we bonded over teaching in brick and mortar traditional classrooms in Southeast Asia, which came with their fair share of sweaty bras and adorable interactions with children. We both made the switch from brick and mortar to virtual classroom, and here we are to tell you exactly how that has impacted our lives and our livelihood.
Absolutely. Today, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Albania, and as much as I would like to be out enjoying the weather, I do have some classes booked for myself today, and I will be teaching from my living room, although I would like to be outside doing different things and enjoying my time. Like I said, I'm still not really that mad because all of my classes are mostly regular adult students that I'm booked with, and I really, really enjoy just being able to chat with them. So it's kind of cool. It doesn't really feel like work.
That's right. Before we wax lyrical about our love for our current students, let's talk about the beginning and how this all came about, from the classroom to our living rooms, so to speak. Abby, you did it first. Tell me, how did you do it?
So we talked about this a little bit in the last episode. I had been teaching in a handful of different classroom environments for a couple years when we were living in Southeast Asia. I started in a government high school in Thailand. We switched to a private international pre-kindergarten in Thailand, and that was pretty tough. And when I moved to Da Nang, Vietnam, I was teaching in a private kindergarten, and I was also doing some classes at English centers throughout the city. So I'm driving around town in the rain, I'm collecting supplies, I'm making all of these plans. I was soaked head to toe by the time I showed up. When it wasn't raining, I was sweating through my clothing. It was a lot of work. I had to clown the house down to keep the interest of 3-year-olds that don't speak English. It was actually pretty difficult. When I moved to Vietnam, I was working at this kindergarten, and I mentioned last time that I met another American teacher, and she was also a teacher at this kindergarten, but she would teach online on the side just to make a little bit of extra money, and it was sort of easy work. She suggested that I consider it because I was kind of miserable in this kindergarten. I was driving around all the time. I was working really hard when I was at the school, and it just wasn't working for me. I just didn't love it. I like kids, but I also don't love kids. And being surrounded by 35 tiny little humans for hours and hours a day, it was really hard for me. It was really, really hard for me. So I really wanted to check out what this new teaching online thing was all about all those years ago. I found a company that I was interested in. I got hired on. I immediately kind of loved it. I was able to work from home in my shorts, in my living room. I was able to make more money, a lot less hours, far more comfortable. And I worked a schedule where I could sort of decide when I wanted to be available for classes. So I could set up my days where I would teach when I wanted to, and then I could spend the rest of my day doing the things that I love to do personally. I could do my yoga, I could go to the beach, I could go to lunch with my girlfriends, I could go to the gym and swim laps, I could work on my art projects. I just had all of this extra time where I wasn't running around town assembling supplies for a brick and mortar classroom. It really, really, really changed the game. Katy, I know that you made the switch from brick and mortar to online teaching not that long after I did.
Well, because of you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
So tell me how that transition went for you.
Well, the appeal of online teaching was like this siren for me. I had been rejected twice by the Orange Company, I said.
I know who the Orange Company is.
After a while, I just kind of let it go and I focused on teaching in person. It's not that I didn't like teaching in person, but I wanted the same things that you mentioned. A more climate-controlled and comfortable space, the sweet money that was available at the time for teaching for these Chinese companies. It was also a huge opportunity for me to take my laptop with me as I traveled. Even though I was based in Vietnam 90% of the time, I also wanted the option to hop over to Hong Kong for a week or visit my friends in USA without the impact to my finances.
And even chucking your laptop in a backpack to take a motorbike trip to other Vietnamese towns. Yeah, and you just got to do whatever you wanted whenever you wanted because of the flexibility that teaching online opened up.
Flexibility was king in that. There were more reasons than reasons not to. So when you and I had met for the first time, thanks to Banh Mi, you had told me about the Blue Company that you had worked for.
Sorry to interrupt you. The color-coded companies that we're talking about are kind of the nicknames for some of the online teaching platforms because I don't really think we're meant to use the actual names of these companies. So there's the Orange Company and the Blue Company.
You were working for the Blue Company. That was kind of a new thing for you. I had never heard of this company. I'd only known about the Orange Company. So when you said that there was another opportunity, I thought, hey, why not try? After you and I had met for the first time, after having Banh Mi, you told me that there was this new Blue Company that you were working for. I honestly had never considered going to any other company besides the Orange one because I wrongly thought it was the only one that was paying well and was actually legitimate. After knowing you for like 10 hours, you sent me a referral link, and before I knew it, I was teaching my first class with my cat in my lap in my living room, and it was amazing. I scaled back hours at the English centers and eventually went fully online. So the gettings were really good at this point. We had to work a maximum of 20 hours to live really well, like royalty, in my opinion. The savings were incredible. I took months off to travel. It was perfect. But we always knew that the bubble would burst. But I thought we had another maybe 5 or 10 years before that would happen. And then COVID happened.
Yes. And I would also like to add that we were making good wages for the work that we had to do. But I also think it's important to mention that the places where we were living, the cost of living was so affordable. That's why we were able to take a pretty moderate salary and roll it into a really beautiful lifestyle.
For sure.
We weren't paid some atrocious amount of money. Our salary was fair, but because of where we lived and because of the decisions that we made about how to spend the money that we did make, our salaries went so much further.
It's stretched.
I think that's important to note. So like you said, COVID happened, which initially proved to be a pretty financially beneficial situation for us because when everybody in the world went into lockdown, we already had jobs. We had jobs that we could do online. We had jobs that were not affected necessarily by the negative parts of COVID lockdowns. And what I mean by that is our students, who were at the time all kids that we were teaching online, who are usually in brick and mortar classrooms most days of the week, were suddenly locked down at home. So they had all this extra time. They were always at home. So we went from being able to schedule classes only during after school hours and weekend hours with these students. All of a sudden, we could teach them all day, every day. We couldn't really do anything but work because of lockdown in our own lives. So we just sort of stayed at home and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. We threw ourselves into working as much as we could most days of the week for a number of months, and we stacked. It was pretty amazing.
I made so much money during that time, but it was not long before the good times kind of came to an end, actually.
A screeching halt, actually. I always sort of had the sense that the bubble would burst. Did you feel like that?
Oh, for sure.
You knew
we
it
talked
was
about
coming.
this. We knew it was going to happen.
Yeah. You knew the bubble would eventually burst. I wasn't exactly sure how or why, but I just knew that the amount of money that we were making for the job that we were doing was not just sustainable forever. It just wasn't going to be around forever. I was really surprised as to exactly how our first online teaching jobs went belly up, so to speak. I kind of thought it might be a matter of an oversaturated market that would take these companies away from us or would take this income away from us. And it was a combination of that and something else that I certainly did not anticipate whatsoever, which had more to do with the Chinese government and a massive overnight change in legislation. You know a little bit more about that logistical stuff, so I'm going to kind of let you take over and tell more of this story.
Before I get into that, I just want to preface this as I am not an expert. I certainly do not know much about Chinese or global policies. However, I am just going to report what I learned through this time by research and also observation and reporting from my actual Chinese students at the time. What had happened was a supply and demand issue at first, just like you said. Before COVID, we worked in a niche sector. People in countries such as the UK and the USA did not consider working for these online English centers. We were living inexpensively in countries where our salary really stretched. But this is not the case for people who live in the UK, Australia, USA, where the salary would not go as far.
The cost of living is just too high.
It's too high.
Yeah.
So our salary was not enough for them to make ends meet until, like so many people in the world, they lost their jobs and were forced home with no options because of COVID. The bulk of native English-speaking teachers that were available all of a sudden, it was just massive.
It was like a flood.
It was
a flood of available teachers.
So the first thing that happens was that we had a dramatic salary reduction across all of the platforms. I went from making an average about $25 an hour, which dropped to $15 just suddenly. At this time, this sent shockwaves through the industry and it felt like the end of the world. But in hindsight, this was just only the beginning. The companies now had so many teachers that we were desperate to get the students. So they didn't need to keep paying us the same wages as we're all independent contractors. And really, there's not a lot of rights for people like us. There were a lot of legal loopholes that existed because the companies were based in Hong Kong, USA, UK, but the staff were scattered around the world. So employee protections and taxation were just such a gray area at the time.
Yeah, there were teachers that were from South Africa, Ireland, Australia, US, UK. I mean, they were from all over the world.
Everywhere.
So how do these random companies regulate people?
It's impossible.
Salaries, wages?
At the time, that was very different. Now, because more people work online, there's a lot more discussion about how to do regulations for global companies. So we submitted to working at the reduced rate, as we had hoped that maybe in the future we could build that salary back up. Once COVID ended, in a few months, and everybody went back to work, or so we thought. So what had happened next was that COVID did not end in a few months.
No, it did not.
It did not. And this is when China kind of got involved. China and USA, the relationship between these places is not great. It's a little bit hairy. Suddenly, all of these companies that are based outside of China are making millions of dollars, especially the biggest ones that were based in the USA and Hong Kong. They were making so much money off of the Chinese students.
So all of that money is leaving China.
It's leaving China. And Xi Jinping hated this. Understandably so. What made matters worse was that the government of China did not also have its usual control over the influence of, quote, Western teachers that we have over their students. So us teachers could potentially be influencing the information that the kids would receive. We might be promoting a westernization of their culture. So there was just a big lack of control. Suddenly, Xi came out with this policy that he called the double reduction policy, and also released a cultural manifesto called something like Xi's Thoughts.
Xi Jinping, huh?
Yes, which was required for all children to learn in their schools. The double reduction policy on paper was a response to the growing mental health problems for young learners in China due to the overworking, constant lessons, relentless homework that the children were supposed to do. This policy was supposed to put a limit on the number of hours that a child is supposed to do outside of the classroom. On paper, this is kind of a good idea. We have students, you remember our students who had so many hours of homework, and it's really sad to hear their summer vacations just go away without having any playtime. So this sounds like a great idea.
I do remember this policy sort of being dressed up like we're going to take all of this extra work, stress, pressure off of our Chinese students by limiting the number of hours that they can study outside of school. But it did feel like it was just a dressed up policy to keep Chinese money in the country and eliminate foreign teachers teaching Chinese students from other places in the world.
Absolutely. Also, this was secondary response to the population growth issue in China. They're allowed to have more than one child now.
Yeah.
But they're not having more than one child because they're spending so much of their money on the one child. Not just their money, but all of the hopes and the dreams of the future of the family line is on this one child.
And they're spending big money on extra classes, on English classes, music classes, math classes, science classes, all of these extra opportunities to just learn outside of school.
So this is also meant as a way to relieve some of the burden, the financial burden that comes with raising these very competitive children. This was supposed to be a great idea for all people involved. But it also said that any outside classroom learning, so outside of like school time, needed to be done by Chinese people who work for a Chinese-based company. So if you were an American person working at a Shanghai international school as a primary school teacher, you're fine because you're within those school hours. So this was mostly targeting after school extra kind of learning.
And especially targeting teachers that were not physically located within China. Yeah.
So at the same time, Xi's manifesto came out describing his desire to go back to the good old days of Mao, like a make China great again approach.
Yeesh.
Back to very conservative values, back to a, quote, masculine China, and an attack on excessive forms of wealth. We international teachers did not always represent those specific values, so I'm sure that also played a factor.
Mm-hmm.
So after all these policies were released, we were on a slow march towards unemployment.
We all knew it was coming. We weren't sure what to do.
Exactly. Some companies closed immediately. My friend was working in China at an English language center. She showed up to teach to find it shuttered and to notice that she would need to leave China during a pandemic because her work visa was now null and void.
What a nightmare.
Some online companies promised that we would be okay and then closed overnight.
I remember that.
Some hung on for as long as they could until the last possible moment. And this chain of events not only put tens of thousands of international people out of work, but countless Chinese employees who worked for those companies. So it was kind of an absolute disaster.
For the online teaching world and for the English teaching world, I think it was a big disaster. And you also make mention, which I think is good, of all of the Chinese employees that worked in admin, they worked in software, they worked in development. They were all out of a job. Even before they were out of a job, they were dealing with all of these inquiries from people like us who are wondering where our salaries have gone. Out. So they were doing all of this really, really difficult customer service work. Also, it was just a weird time. And I was actually living in India during COVID, and that was when I taught my last online class with what we will refer to as the Blue Company. And Pants and I had no idea what was really next for us. We had been living in India where I had gone to do a yoga teacher training, and then we started teaching again online once we realized that COVID was going to sort of stop the world of travel for a while. So once we realized that it was a matter of time before all of these companies were just going to shut down, we taught our last couple classes. We made some arrangements to go back to the United States and visit family, get vaccinated. We knew that the travel bans would start to lift pretty soon. We taught our final classes. We went back home and we weren't really sure what was next. So we arrived in the USA. We were effectively unemployed. We were without jobs. I remember being in the United States, visiting some family. I knew that I wanted to continue traveling, but I knew that I did not have an online gig to go back to.
This is during a time everybody wanted an online gig
Everybody wanted to work online, and I wasn't really sure what that was going to look like. I was able to save some money from the good old days, so I knew that I had enough money to get a ticket out of the United States, to get to Istanbul, Turkey, to get an apartment, to live for a while, but eventually I was going to have to figure out how to make money and continue this lifestyle. I remember what I did, but I'll save my story for a little bit later. How did you go from being jobless to switching to what you're doing currently?
Oh, it was a series of panic attacks. I tried starting my own private business. I got a few students, but the market was absolutely flooded with everyone doing the same thing. And everyone was charging a lower rate to attract more people. So the going rate was almost insulting at that moment. The Chinese parents that were supposed to limit their children's lessons were actually finding back doors to continue their studying. But this meant that the parents could control the rate and were demanding unlivable wages. Some teachers made it work, but I just couldn't survive off of the few students I had picked up, which were ex-students of mine from the Blue Company. The parents really stayed wanting these lessons, and to this day, years later, they're still finding ways to get these lessons.
Absolutely.
There was a company that I had kept as my backup. It paid $10 an hour. I really didn't want to take this job because this was way lower than minimum wage in most countries. But I continued to live in places I could afford, and eventually I caved and started teaching there. And then I brought you into that.
Yes, and I will be honest, the salary was a huge turnoff. You actually got pants to do it long before I was willing to take that salary. I just didn't want to, I think, admit to myself that this is what it was going to be from here on out.
Worth.
This is the new normal.
Yes.
Yeah. I really didn't want to take this job because it was so much lower than minimum wage in most countries, and maybe not most, in a lot of countries in the world. But we did continue to live in places that we could afford. Pants started doing some of these online classes with this new company that you're talking about. I saw how much fun he was having. Frankly, he was having really, really awesome conversations with super interesting people. After some time of seeing this, I eventually caved. I got online, I got a job with this same company. It was sort of wonderful. I had so much flexibility. I had absolutely zero stress. I was making a little bit of money, and some money is better than no money at all.
Sure.
But the amount of control that I had over my schedule, the low levels of stress and planning that was necessary, the conversations that I got to have with some of these super, super amazing students and really cool people from all over the world totally is what made it worth it for me. Now, it's not about the money. The money is not good. The money works, but it's the students that I really, really enjoy. Another really cool thing about this company, I will be honest, with these previous Chinese companies, if we didn't like a student, if we didn't connect with a student, we could not shake them. There was no way to say, I don't really love this student, but mom and dad keep booking me. There was no way to hide. With this current company, for the sake of transparency, if there is a person that I don't really connect with, or someone is rude, or a conversation goes in a place that I don't really love, or whatever, they don't show up for a scheduled class, we can block them.
Yep.
We can hide. We never have to see them again. Whereas if we love them, they become regulars. They become friends. Like we've talked about before, they literally become people that we have met while we travel. It's incredible. For me, it was a huge relief not to have to teach basic grammar, not to have to provide these big lesson plans and activities for a bunch of kids in a classroom that had way too many bodies for the space of the room. I was tired of being a clown. I was tired of doing ABCs with little kids. And that was largely what we were doing with those Chinese companies.
Yeah.
They were children. They were tiny little kids. We could teach kids now with this company if we want to, but for me, teaching adults is just a lot better. It just is a better fit for me and the things that I enjoy talking about. Most of the time with this new company and the adults that I speak with, we're not really doing anything very structured. It's conversation practice. It's adults that have a pretty good level of English, a pretty good grasp of the language and the grammatical structures, but they just don't have anybody to practice English with. And that's where we come in. We just provide a conversation. And it's really cool because we get to talk about literally anything that we want to. I get to know these students on a personal level. I get to know about their jobs, their life, their families, their problems, their good days, their bad days, their vacations, all of the things that make a person, we get to talk about whatever we want. It's awesome. I have really gotten to know a lot of my students very well. They have gotten to know me in return. I love my students. Honestly, I don't even like to use the word students because I view most of these people, they're my friends. They are not students. I am not a teacher. We are friends that are having chats, and somehow I get to make a little bit of money to have these conversations. It's amazing.
That's right. And this money does stretch, especially if you're willing to put in the hours, you can make more than enough. And that's what I've been doing, is working a lot of hours and paying for trips to Italy. So back to your point about the benefit of these relationships that we're building, it is really cool. It's also a privilege of having the entire world open up to us, especially as people who love culture and traveling. It's really amazing. I have mornings with my Japanese students. I have afternoons with my Saudis and my Turks, evening with my Brazilians, as a few, for example. How cool to be exchanging not just language, but also our cultures. Sometimes I am the first foreigner they've ever talked to. They might have stereotypes and prejudices about Americans. I might have about their culture too in the beginning. It is a really cool thing to share a laugh, talk to someone who's really different from you, leaving the lesson realizing that even though we have so much differences, we have way more in common. It's a really special thing, and it's kind of hard to articulate because these conversations, I think, do more in terms of seeing the humanity in the differences in the world. I think that's just an amazing thing.
I agree with you completely. It's incredible, some of the things that I have talked with my, again, students. I don't like to say students. It's incredible, some of the topics that we have had conversations about. Sometimes it's difficult topics. Sometimes they have illnesses in their family or they've experienced loss. You know, a year ago when my mom died, my students would reach out to me. They would check on me. They would offer condolences, and they would give me a place to be sad sometimes during a lesson. It wasn't about A, B, C, D, E, F, G and grammar. I could just talk with them about what it's like to go through a grieving process.
And how that looks in their culture.
And what it looks like for them. And it's so interesting how having very natural conversations is of such value to a lot of these English learners, because it opens up entire categories of vocabulary, slang, idioms, different phrases that we use in different ways that maybe they had never had the opportunity to practice talking about before. It's really, really amazing. So although we don't get paid all that much, we do make enough to get by where we are living right now. We travel a bit, we have our fun. In addition to the money, we get to create this global network of really amazing people. I've talked to doctors, brain surgeons, politicians, all of these people that we get to connect with on a human level about how we all really don't like mosquitoes and nobody likes humidity. All of these sort of base human experiences that we get to chat about. It's really, really cool. And we end up laughing until we are almost sick sometimes. We laugh and we laugh and we talk. Our cultures are so different. Maybe our marriages look different. Our families look different. Our religions look different. Our politics look different. But at the end of the day, there is this connectedness that we're able to build. And I think that this contributes to a growing tolerance in the world and an acceptance of other people through our differences. It really does sort of foster respect.
Perfectly said.
Does that make sense? It's just such a beautiful thing. And so I'm serious when I say these people are my homies. I love the people that I talk with all day. I just spent time, I've told you this before, with a student of mine in Istanbul. We hung out a few times. We went for coffee. We did some different things. I have met students in Cairo, Egypt. I've met Italian students here in Albania. It's always such a natural feeling of friendship and nothing more than that. It's not a student-teacher relationship for me. It's just a friendship, and that's beautiful. We've spent hours getting to know these people, and sometimes we get to meet them for real. It's incredible.
It's the craziest thing, and I'm so lucky. I've been invited to weddings. I dragged you in pants to get an Aperol Spritz with my Italian doctor.
I loved him.
When we were in Bologna. It's just so wonderful in so many ways. I really can kind of relate to my students more than I do with people back home. Mm-hmm. I really can't explain it because the curiosity and the exchanges, it can be emotional sometimes, but it's so rewarding.
Have you noticed, especially with the way that you and I have traveled so much, that a lot of the people we talk with in our classes, they almost look at us like travel resources?
They do.
Does that make sense?
All the time.
I have a lot of people who will contact me, or regulars that I talk with frequently. They want to hear about the places that I have been, and they almost want me to help them plan their own adventures. It's so funny. I love it.
In a lot of ways, we are opening up the world and possibilities to some of these people, just as they have opened up a world and resources for us, because I do the same thing. When I have these Brazilian people in my classroom, I'm like, hey, what are your 3 favorite places to visit in case I go to Brazil one day? So,
I have so many pins.
Yes, from my students.
In countries I've never been.
It's incredible. So it works both ways.
It does.
Abby, will you keep teaching online once we're back in the homeland?
Oh, I really, really want to. I definitely intend to keep doing this as long as I can. Unfortunately, the reality is the money that we make from this platform is nowhere near enough to survive in the United States, period. It's just not. So I think I would love to continue keeping in touch with all of these people that have become very, very important to me. But at this point, it's kind of a wait and see sort of thing. And I think you're probably in the same boat.
Totally. I can't survive in the USA for $10 an hour, but I do want to keep it as a part-time gig. Once I have more stable work, maybe weekends and night times, just because I love my students.
I really, really do. I love the people that I talk with. And it's funny because this teaching online gig has sort of spanned the entire friendship that you and I have had.
Totally.
Ever since I have known you, I have been teaching online. Ever since you have been teaching online, you have known me. It has covered our entire friendship, which I do think is kind of funny. So you're welcome for me getting into it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm forever grateful that you did bring me into the fold. Speaking of which, thinking of the good old days of us teaching online at first, it's got me super nostalgic about our first days as friends. Also, our old stomping grounds around Da Nang, Vietnam.
I love Da Nang, and I am really excited to talk about it. I think it's a good idea for our next episode for the two of us to really dig into how we got together and some of those good old days back in Da Nang. To our listeners, thank you so much for sticking with us through this. Please do tune in next time to hear about how our lives finally connected, how Katy and I got together, and the magic that was the good old days of Da Nang.
Thank you so much for listening as we unpacked quite the range of emotions today. We promised the good and the bad, and I'm just glad to say that we can end this episode on a very high note. If you have any stories you would like featured, please write us on social media.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm Abby.
I'm Katy.
And until next time,
Thoughts and taters.
Bye. Thanks for joining us on She's Got Baggage, the podcast where we depart into the travel world that has embraced us for the past 9 years. We invite you to continue exploring with us, from tales that stir your thoughts to moments that tickle your funny bone and tug at your heartstrings. Our itinerary promises to inspire and captivate.
Don't forget to secure your Buddy Pass by subscribing, ensuring you never miss our next adventure. Your feedback and reviews are always appreciated as we continue to navigate these unexplored territories together. Your reviews are so important so that we can stay on course with content that keeps you coming back for a return trip. Until next time,
I'm Abby.
And I'm Katy. For additional perks, check us out on she'sgotbaggagepodcast.com. And you can also find us on social media.
And remember that this has been She's Got Baggage, where every adventure has a story.